So welcome to this series called the Perioperative Coach. In this series we have top tips on all aspects of perioperative care from some of the world's experts working together to enhance surgical recovery. Don't forget to look on the show notes on topmedtalk.com for additional links to papers, etc. And of course, if you haven't done it already, subscribe to Top Med Talk. Top Med Talk.
And we are joined today by Dr. Ruchir Gupta. He's the medical lead for enhanced recovery at Stony Brook University School of Medicine and Department of Anesthesia. We also have here Joni Brady. She is the chair of the International Collaboration of Perianesthesia Nurses Incorporated. We'll start with you, Dr. Gupta. Tell me a little bit about your background, how you became a medical lead for the enhanced recovery program there at Stony Brook, and what enhanced recovery means to you.
So I was actually in private practice, and I wanted to move into an academic setting, and I had known Dr. Gann from my days as a resident, so he was starting off at Stony Brook as chairman. So he brought me in, and he introduced me to the concept of enhanced recovery, and I came to AZER at its inaugural meeting and was involved in its development from the beginning. So I just followed AZER from its birth, and as such, I brought what I learned from AZER to the hospital that I work for. And so we began enhanced recovery protocols. We began with colorectal. We started forming multidisciplinary teams, realizing how ERS cannot be an anesthesia-only initiative. It has to have a nursing component. It has to have a surgical component. It has to have a nutritional component. And from the beginning, how important it is to develop relationships. We just started having meetings and started developing models in which we could communicate, and we tied that with what was being published within the evidence, and we started engaging in better practices at Stony Brook, and we got some terrific pilot data. The hospital was very happy with what we were doing. They began to give us more resources to do a better job, and so we're now at a stage where we call basically ERS 2.0, where we did the hard part of working with the resources we have, but now we have an infusion of more people, more resources, and we're looking to take it to the next level. We
sat on a panel together at ACER 2017, and I was intrigued when the question came up, when you have limited resources, how do you run a program? How do you navigate that? And I think you had some great experiences and kind of what I always call workarounds, utilization of current resources that you have.
So just to give you a little bit more of the background, our hospital's a union hospital. And that does have implications because there is slightly more tribalism. Every group sees themselves as their own entity and not to be messed with by another group. So an anesthesiologist going to a group of nurses and saying, we're going to change practices is not welcomed as much. So what I started doing was basically, instead of having a top-down approach where we tell the nurses what the plan is, having a ground-up approach where we formed a team, a multidisciplinary team, in which we took the different nurses that take care of the patients. So like a council of nurses almost. One nurse from our POS clinic, one nurse from our preoperative holding area, one nurse from our PACU, and one nurse from the main floor where these patients are discharged to, and then our acute pain nurse. So these were our nurses, and then we don't have a PA from the surgical side, so we had a surgeon who was our point person, so that surgeon, and then from anesthesia myself, we would meet regularly. And we would discuss the patient's continuum. Where are we having our challenges? Are we having problems at the POS level? Are we having trouble identifying patients in the holding area that were already flagged by POS that didn't make it there? Something as simple as getting the patient's preoperative Celebrex was a challenge because the surgeon orders it, the POS faxes it over, but then the pharmacy didn't release it because we're electronic in the hospital, but we don't have electronic ordering in the surgeon's office. So that's not something you can discuss over email. Right. And it's definitely not something you can figure out on your own. So that council figured out what the best process was. But the best part of this council wasn't what we got accomplished. It was the way we did it. The fact that we identified problems and everybody was at the table. There was no head. There was a round table. And everybody was at an equal footing. That's what made the biggest difference, because the nurses felt that, look, even if we can't figure out this process tomorrow, these guys want it to work, and I can't I can't let the baton fall.
I wish I could pay royalty fees for every time I use the Council of Nurses. And whenever I'm
$5.
I know, right? I mean, I think it's a great idea. I mean, I think it's a true testament to multidisciplinary approach to care. It's getting all the voices heard and how you do it. So, Joni, we have been working. We both are on the nursing committee for the American Society for Enhanced Recovery, and we always talk about what's the number one question you get as an ERAS coordinator, as someone involved with enhanced recovery or perianesthesia care. What is the job description? And I know, Dr. Gupta, you had mentioned we're having a hard time coming up with the job description, but I think you did a pretty good job when you said it's tracking the patients through the continuum of care.
Yep.
And then by doing that, you see what those points are, and then you work from patient side, making sure that they're getting those, provider side, making sure that providers know what they're supposed to be doing, when they're supposed to be doing it. Joni, can you talk to that a little bit?
Well, I just wanted to follow up on something Dr. Gupta said about the nursing team. As a doctor of nursing practice, we focus on evidence translation to the clinical team. And what I have found over the years, I first stepped into a recovery room back in 1980 and changed the name in the 90s as a manager, but I've seen the practice over the years, and I think a couple of things. We have fragmentation across those phases of care, but the continuity across the phases of care is the nurse. Mm-hmm. So at every point of care, there's a nurse responsible to oversee the care of the patient. What I have found with nurses is if you come with evidence and patient, what that does for the patient, the buy-in comes pretty quickly because no nurse wants not to do a great job and have that patient have a great experience. So I think what you did was perfect because you engage them, you engage them across the phases of care, and they saw the value as you showed them what an enhanced recovery program can do. So kudos on that. That's fantastic. In terms of the role of the coordinator, we do get this question quite a bit, and I did look into the literature and did sort of a synthesis of the literature on what that role entails.
What did you see? Was there a lot of literature?
There was not a lot of literature, and we find that often in the nursing world. You know, we never even had a research arm in nursing funded by the federal government until the mid-'70s, so we have a lot of work to do to build a body of evidence, unlike medicine, which has loads, but very scientific. And a lot of what nurses would like to look at are patient-reported outcomes, which we heard a lot about today, and how to follow that patient post-discharge. We've got them optimized. We do the procedure, then what? So that goes to your staffing conundrum.
And patient experience, not just, we're measuring what our patient's is. Satisfaction is not the same as experience.
And patient-reported outcomes, which really play into experience. So if you go home with 5 days of PONV, are you going to think that procedure was great?
Right.
You know, again, the more we use these protocols and implement to prevent a lot of the things that we have seen over the years, I think that's really valuable. But to the role, firstly, that coordinator position needs to have the expertise to review and rate evidence so that you're really working with the best available evidence. And then to be a part of that collaboration to develop those protocols, because again, if you think about where nurses work, it's at the point of care, and they typically know what resources are available, where the gaps are, where the trouble spots are for equipment and that sort of thing, because it's great, we want to do this, but, how do we get from A to B? So I think your frontline nursing and nursing management team will be a big resource there.
Okay, let me talk about that. So I think that's great that you bring up the point that it's the frontline providers that are the ones that can actually be the innovators because they understand those gaps. When we were out at the conference last month, we talked to Shauna Butler. She's a nurse she is a MBA nurse, and she talks about innovation. And it's the first thing she said. You have to go to your frontline providers to see where your gaps are, and they're the ones that are the innovators. They're going to come up with solutions to your problems. Right? Your nurses, you coming up with a solution, we're just going to gather them all together and get them in the room, and we're going to chat. I think that's where that comes from. But just as an aside,
and it also allows you to identify your early adopters to bring into that change management model. So that's a really important thing to do and to engage them, because at the end of the day, they're the one moving the patient through the phases of care. So the more we engage them and get their feedback about how best to do that, the more likely are the laggards to buy in, because they're seeing their practice is improving and patients are more satisfied at the end of the encounter. So
for sure.
All good stuff.
Yeah.
Another thing would be to ensure efficient resource use, which ties into what we were just talking about. Also to maintain contemporary knowledge on the principles and really look at education, which we heard a lot about today, expectation setting for the patient. Typically, that would be a role that the coordinator ensures that activity is happening through resources.
And continuous education. We sat and talked to a couple of the other nurses, and sustainability and long-term compliance only comes from continuing education. Dr. Gupta,
can I just chime in there? That's such a great observation. What I found, because when I was basically without a coordinator, so I had to do the education. What I found was that education has to be in small groups. Yes. And in fact, I would also say that when you do the presentation, don't let there be a laptop between you and them as you're doing the presentation. It should really be that you're standing right next to them. Do it in small groups. Do short presentations. And at the end, always have a couple of slides on commonly encountered issues. So I would have scenarios. You just started your shift at 7 p.m. You see that there's a PCA order. However, you notice that the patient was an ERAS patient, and ERAS patients receive intrathecal Dermorph. What should you do? Corrective action. Call the PACU and clarify, was this patient an ERAS patient? Contact the acute pain service. So it's not a multiple choice. It's just what is the corrective action. So they also appreciated that I'm not just coming and saying, okay, this is it, fix it. I get that there's going to be problems, and this is what the solution would be. So let me just kind of give you a heads up that it's a simple solution if you would just follow it. And I would give them a copy of the slides. And that's key. Small groups, short presentations, frequently, for different shifts. The night shift really appreciates it. I mean, the day shift, of course, appreciates it, but the night shift, they really appreciate it because nobody ever gives them presentations. Right. They're kind of mopping up the mess of the day. So doing that goes a long ways.
Yeah, and it's our job description. I mean, it's part of that.
And you build that capital, again, the buy-in capital with that. And to that, what you were doing there was building momentum for your program. You were really leading that change to improve patient care by engaging with them directly. And also that consultation role that you provide to the staff as they move into protocol implementation.
Sure.
Another huge area for the coordinator is to measure those enhanced recovery pathway elements for adherence and to ensure that performance improvement activities are occurring. So I thought of, as you were talking, Dr. Gupta, the ability when you're measuring data and looking at trends to have a feedback loop to the staff. And what I would do with my team was I would come back with a case that went great, and they did all the elements, and the patient's length of stay was low, and they had no nausea and vomiting, and they went home early, versus one where we missed several elements along that pathway. And so I would use that as a comparison. Here's ERAS when it works, and here's what happens when we don't follow our own evidence.
And who are you presenting this to?
To the team, multidisciplinary team.
To the multidisciplinary team.
Yes, which is part of that coordinator role, again, to focus people on outcomes and rapid cycle quality improvement. Because if you start seeing a trend and you're looking at your data pretty regularly, you can quickly address something.
How are you capturing data?
Well, that's why you need a coordinator, first and foremost. That's a challenge. We were talking about this today in the nursing committee meeting. That's an area that really needs administrative buy-in. If you're not going to leverage an electronic or machine data report, who's doing all that data collection and where is it coming from? And to assign it as a collateral duty to someone that already has a job is ill-informed. And again, I think really to have a dedicated person to perform that task. We all would love machine data reports, but what we are finding is it's a challenge to get the IT resources, and there's really just no good platform available yet that's, lock and load, ready to go. So it's a challenge. That piece is definitely a challenge, and why you would need the resource to provide that feedback to the team.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I thank you for going over that job description and Dr. Gupta for validating all of the things that we're talking about. It's just a huge piece and one of the most important pieces of an enhanced recovery pathway to have that coordination, wherever it comes from, wherever it starts to where it can be, and creating the business case for that and having all those tools at your fingertips there whenever we have that. So thank you so much. I'm not going to take up any more of your time because I know that at the end of the day we're all ready for to relax. Thank you again so much for participating, and hopefully we can get you back and have more.
Thanks for
really
having
critical
me.
discussion.
Appreciate
Thanks.
it. Take care.
Top Med Talk.
Nick Majerison here. Thanks for listening to Top Med Talk. Now, before we let you go, it's important that we remind you to subscribe to Top Med Talk. That way you'll never, ever miss another episode. Also, if we could encourage you to join us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, pretty much every single social media platform, we're there. Join us. And finally, check out topmedtalk.com. If you go to our website, you can subscribe to email updates. That way we can always tell you where we're going to be, what we're going to be doing, and how you can join us. topmedtalk.com, and click on the section marked email updates. Finally, Top Med Talk is proud to act as the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about them as well. ebpom.org is their website. That's ebpom.org. And if you go to ebpom.org/meetings, you can find out about some of the wonderful meetings that we attend and cover across the year here on Top Med Talk. That's ebpom.org/meetings.